So in this video, I'm going to put in this Spartan locker and replace my Aussie locker in my 1999 Jeep Cherokee XJ. I'll tell you why I'm doing that in the comment section. I'm not going to go over that in the video. But first, I want to show you what comes in the box. So here is the first part of the locker set, and then here's the second part with the loose pins and springs. Comes with a couple of stickers, beer cozy, instruction manual. So that's what's in the box, and now I'm going to take out the Aussie locker from my front axle and bring it back here, take it apart, put this one back together, and hopefully it all works out as it should. So I'm going to go ahead and put the Spartan locker in, and to do that I'm going to remove these caps. So when you do that, make sure that you keep the caps for each side on each side and that the orientation is properly marked. In my case, I'm going to put a magnet here, a magnet here. When these come off, they're just going to get stuck on each side so that I know the exact orientation to put these back in. And then when you put them back in, make sure you do it to spec. So I'm going to clean this all out, and then I'll remove the caps and then remove the unit. So to remove these 4 bolts, you need a 5/8 inch socket, and I might have to move my tie rod bar. I can't remember if I did that the last time. I'm going to try taking it out without moving it, but there's a good chance I might have to. This is actually out of a Grand Cherokee. I've got a Cherokee XJ, so we'll see how that works out. So in order to do this job, you do need to remove the axle shaft away from the housing. You don't need to remove your hub, but if you do, it's easier to remove the nut while the wheel is attached and on the ground for leverage. If not, then you can just take a large screwdriver, put it in one of these flutes, and then use this cast bracket on the top or the bottom, depending on which way you're spinning the nut, as leverage. So I'm going to go ahead and remove my wheel ends, and then I can get the locker out. Alright, so now that the axle shafts are out, I'll try to remove this. I don't know if this bar is going to be in my way or not, and it is. So, and when you take these out, you are going to have these cups here, so just make sure that you also keep those to the appropriate size, which I am going to do now, so that when I reinstall them, they don't go in the wrong way. And of course, after I turned the camera off, I just figured I'd give it a shot if I could just twist it and take it out over the top, and I was able to do that without squeezing anything, pressing on anything. Came out pretty easy, so for that reason, I didn't have to remove my tie rod end. I'm not sure if it's going to work on your XJ or not if you have the factory type tie rod. Like I said, this tie rod's out of a Grand Cherokee, so I was able to do it with this particular one. So looking in here, everything looks really good. I don't have any chips anywhere, any, like I said, glitter in the oil. The seals look good, so I don't think I'm going to do anything to the inside of this, even though I already have it open. And I just learned that I am really pressed for time now, so I need to get on the road here soon, so I'm only going to do what I need to do. Okay, so to start, there is a hole right here that you need to punch the pin out of. I don't have a punch that's long enough, so I just took a nail, a galvanized nail in this case, and it fits just in the hole, and ground off the tip. So hopefully that will work to get this out. And it is working. So one thing to note is that you do want a nail that fits inside that hole just barely, because if it's too small, your nail is going to end up going inside the pin hole. So in this case, it just barely entered it, and I was able to pull it out easily. So keep that in mind when you do that if you decide to use this modification. Okay, so now that the pin is out, you need to remove all these bolts. So in order to do that, I'm going to stick it in the vise that's behind me. Have an 11/16 bit here with a large breaker bar, and that should help bust those loose. They can be a real pain to get off. Now I'm not going to clamp this in there really hard. I'm just going to use the sides here as my leverage in between the vise without banging on anything. You don't want to damage your bearing or anything like that. So actually I'm going to stick that at the bottom of the vise. You also don't want to get a whole lot of debris in this thing, so you do want to be careful. So that's just snug in there. It's not cranked tight. And then just start breaking these loose. And these are coming out pretty easy. I torqued these down to the proper specs when I did this 3 years ago. And when you put this back together, you'll definitely want to torque them down to the proper specs. Now, another thing that I did on this is that I marked with a silver Sharpie where these two surfaces met up. I don't know if this is balanced or not, but just to be careful, I went ahead and I did mark, and we'll put this back together the same way that it came apart. So now that these are all loosened, I can just take them out. I to do it, so I'm just going to take them out in order and put them back in the same way. It's probably overkill and not necessary. Once that is done, this probably won't pop right off, so you will need to possibly manipulate it a little bit. You want to make sure that you don't drop it. And now it's separated. And there you go. So you can set that aside. And then next, we're going to take out the pin. So to take out the pin, you just need to press it through either side, and it might take a little bit of manipulating, but in this case it came out pretty easy. And if it gets hung up, you can stick something in the hole and get it the rest of the way out, if it'll cooperate. There it goes. So something to point out is if you're putting in a locker and you've already got your gears in here, at this point you could spin out your gears. If you're using an Aussie locker like I did, I had to reuse the shims, and you want to make sure that you take the shims from the appropriate side and put them back in on the appropriate side. But as far as I know, for a Spartan locker, you do not reuse those shims. I've read through the manual and it says nothing about reusing the shims. So at this stage, this is as far as I've done before. Now it's going to be trial and error for me to try to figure out how do I get this thing out, because it is held in by springs, so I'm going to have to hold down the pins in order to collapse this and pull it out. So I'm going to do that off camera. I'm not going to bother you with that and let you know how I did it. Okay, so I just did the one, and I'll show you how I'm going to do the rest of them. So all I did is I have these pick tools, and I go in to the spring, push the spring down and compress it, twist it out at the same time, and then your spring will come out like that. And then with the little possibly little bouncing of the unit up and down, the pin should fall out if it doesn't on its own. So I'm going to do that all the way around, and that should solve my problem to get this to collapse so I can take it out. All right, so now that it's out, just have to do a little bit of the manipulating. So there are two flat sides, and you want to get those flat sides lined up so that they can come out. So at the same time, you've got the top and the bottom trying to hold this in place. And there's that, there's that, there's that, and there you go. So now you've got empty carrier. Now in my case, I can feel that there's still shims up here. So you want to make sure and check for those shims. So that one, in case I need to use it, came from the top, and now I've got the video to remind me. And I don't think, no, there's no shim at the bottom. So now I do not have shims, and there is my locker. Okay, now that this is ready to be installed, you have these two similar rings, and then you have 4 of these studs and 4 springs. These two just got stuck together. And then you also have 4 pins. So what you want to do, and I have these sitting in gear oil because I don't want to put them in dry, it's just how I'm going to do it. So the spring goes inside the void of the stud, and then the spring goes in first to the hole. And that, if you can see it or not, but that groove around there is so that you can press this down and put this pin in this hole to hold it. Now, keep in mind that is now under pressure. If you accidentally pull this pin out, it's going to go shooting, and if you're like me, you'll probably never find it again. So make sure that that pin is in there nice and secure, and then to go around all 4 holes, 2 on each of the rings, and put them in. Okay, so now that you have these set up, you need to install the other components. Now there's no top or bottom. You can use either one, top or bottom. So some people will put grease on these, but grease can react to your gear oil and you'll end up having to change it out sooner than you normally would. So for that reason, I'm just lubing it with gear oil. So the bottom one can go here, or one of them can go in the bottom. It spins freely, I don't have any debris in there or anything. And then I'll lube up this one. But now that I'm not using grease, it's not going to stay up in place. So I'm going to have to mess with it once I put this all together to get it to sit right. Some people will use the gear or the grease to create a suction to hold that up. Before you install these, you want to make sure that these inserts go in. So the gear side goes up and these inserts go like that. The other thing is that you want to make sure that the void here, this curved area, lines up after it's installed with where your drift pin goes, because that's going to go through that area there. So now that you have these 2 pieces together, you can stick them in here. Take a little bit of finagling, and your 2 outer pins need to go caddy corner, which would be like that. And so on the inside here, you want to make sure that this lines up with the drift pin. So you do that for both of them. The top one's going to be a little bit more complicated just because it's going to have to all come together. So I'll fast forward through that. So make sure that you have the gears facing in the right direction. You want this gear to marry up to the top gear, and then the same thing for the bottom. Okay, so now that you're to this point, you just want to double check and make sure that it is all aligned correctly. Now you need to remember that these inner rings are now sitting down and they're going to be in the way of your drift pin. So what you have to do is, and this is the tricky part, is you need to get those rings to separate and stay apart when you put your drift pin in. So that's why sometimes people use grease. It definitely does help. The job is a lot more difficult when you don't use grease. So make sure that the hole on your drift pin lines up with the hole in the casting. So it really is a balancing act. I'm not doing anything with the screwdriver to damage anything. I'm just trying to get everything to align and seat properly so that I can get the drift pin in. Alright, so at this point you'll want to make sure that your pin is aligned vertically before you put it all the way in. Too far. And then just make sure everything's lined up. Now I'll take the security pin that came with the locker and I will go ahead and tap that in. That'll take a little bit of force because it hasn't been compressed yet, so you might have to play with this a little bit. One thing you don't want to do is mushroom the top of this because you don't want it to get stuck in there after it's all installed. Just make it harder to disassemble it in the future. So don't force it. You'll know if it's working or not. And so you just want to get that seated in there properly. And it is. So everything lines up. Everything still, moves freely in here. But next what you're going to do is start pulling these pins, and that's going to release the springs. So let's do that now. And then when all the springs are released, everything should be together. Before you pull those pins, you might just want to make sure that these gears are lined up, or it could be a little difficult to manipulate that to get them lined up. But more importantly, you want to make sure that the pins are seated in the recess on the other side. And in this case they are, and if you turn it back and forth, you can hear and feel the play that's in there. Okay, so now that this is all back together, one last thing that you want to do before you put your ring gear on is make sure that this spacing right here on the flat surface is within tolerance, because if it's not wide enough, then you might have a shim that you left in there, or there might be some other obstruction. So if we take the measurement, I'm at 145.5 and it needs to be at 0.145 to 1.7. So I'm within tolerance. It's good to go. I'm going to go ahead and put the ring gear back on. I went ahead and lubed this up. You want to clean all this off. I used brake cleaner on all this, so I cleaned off all the surfaces, got as much of the old gear oil off as I could. I lubed the ring gear. I'm going to put this back on. I'm going to hand tighten all the bolts all the way around, and then I am going to torque these down to 55 foot-pounds. And you're going to do that in a crisscross pattern. I'm not going to show that. I'm just going to put it back in the vise, torque everything back down the proper way, and then I'm going to take it back out to the axle housing. Alright, so now that this is all ready to go, I've cleaned it all off. I've made sure there's no debris on it. I'm going to make sure it goes in the right way that you took it out. So I'm going to finagle this up above here and inside. Do not forget to put your races on before you actually install it into the housing. And the gears are intertwined. Just turns the drive shaft. I don't hear anything weird, so good to go. Rag and just wipe some of this off from my greasy hands. I already went ahead and cleaned the mating surface of this and the diff cover so that I can put new gasket sealer on. And then I put my bearing caps here to the sides, so you can put these in the same way, the right one on the right one, and the top bolt going back into the same top bolt. You don't want to get these upside down, so maybe you want to take a picture before you even take them out. And then I'm going to torque these down to 60 foot-pounds. All right, so now that I have this installed and it does seem to turn freely without any hang-ups, I am going to install the axle shafts. So I have the axle shafts in, and I'm not going to spin it to make it ratchet because it's going to be loud and it's not going to go as smooth since there's no gear oil in there. But you can see that there's going to be a little bit of play, and from what I understand, that is pretty much normal. But everything seems to move as it should. Like I said, I'm not going to offset the wheels and make it ratchet, but I will take it for a test drive and make sure that it ratchets like it should. I'm out on the road, I'm doing a couple of U-turns, and everything sounds really good. It's clicking like it should, and that's a comforting sound when you have a lunchbox locker. You know that it's operating correctly. I haven't put it in four-wheel drive yet. I'll do that back closer to my girlfriend's place. But for now, I'm very happy with what I hear. That clicking wasn't there with the Aussie locker, and my tires were chirping because of that. So I'm going to do another U-turn here, and if that goes well, then I'll take it back, put it in four-wheel drive. It's going to bang on pavement because it just does that. It's a lot better to test four-wheel drive on a dirt road, but I don't have anything close that I can go to. So I'll just make sure that nothing grenades inside when I do that. And here on the turn, it sounds really good. It's not super loud inside the vehicle. You can hear it. If I have music on, I won't be able to hear it at all. But it's not overly loud. It's about the same sound that I was getting from my Aussie locker. So I'm really happy with that. So we'll see how it goes when I get on the Continental Divide and I have to actually use this in four-wheel drive. All right, so back at my girlfriend's place, I went ahead and put it in four-wheel drive on her little dead end here and made a few slight turns just to see if it would still click or not, and it didn't. It doesn't engage, it holds. So I'm pretty happy with that. Did it in drive and reverse and everything seems fine. Took it back into two-wheel drive and it clicks as it should, almost, well, right away actually. But I'm happy to know that this thing is back together. I did not want to completely pull it back apart. So it works. I'm happy with that. Now I need to get ready for my trip. I've got 5 days before I need to set sail. So like, dislike, comment, and I'll talk to you later. Thanks for watching.